So we're talking about the National Environmental Isotope Facility, and there is some confusion because NERC facilities have been around for as long as there's been a NERC. But over the years, there have been a number of rebrandings. So NIGL was the previous incarnation, National Isotope Geoscience Laboratories. At one point, it was NIGFSC. All that has changed over the years is how these facilities are grouped together and how they are managed. So the current incarnation of NEIF dates back to about 2019, when it was decided that several of these facilities should be grouped and managed together. And it's basically a consortium of 4 partly NERC-funded laboratories. And they are funded by NERC with sort of a dual purpose. One is to give the UK research community access to analytical facilities, and the other is to implement the scientific program approved under the umbrella of NERC research grants. So typically when you submit a large grant proposal to NERC, if it includes isotope work, that would be costed into the grant and it would be coming to us. A little bit of the admin side. So there are 4 labs. They are located at the British Geological Survey, the Scottish University's Environmental Research Centre in East Kilbride, and at the universities of of Oxford and Bristol. The whole sort of umbrella organization is governed by a strategy group. These would be scientists who are either experts in running large labs or are experts in fields that fall under the remit of NERC. They are not directly involved in how funding is allocated through proposals, and they report back to NERC. Next to this is the operations group. This consists of the heads of the different facilities, and they are responsible for the day-to-day governance of the laboratories. And then separate from that are 3 reviewer panels, creatively labeled panel A, B, and C. These would be scientists who are experts in isotope geoscience, and they would be in charge of evaluating proposals submitted to NEIF. And the reason I mentioned the admin side is that periodically, so on the peer review panels, people serve for 3 years. And there is a term limit in the strategy group as well. So periodically there's a call going out where scientists are invited to express interest in joining one of these panels. Now, how long it might take from you expressing interest to actually being invited depends on your expertise and on what expertise is needed in a particular panel at a particular point in time. But joining the panels is definitely a possibility. So over the course of this talk, I'm going to briefly introduce the facilities that fall under the NEIF umbrella. I'm going to give you some examples of proposals that have been recently approved and that have gone through to publication stage and are all done and dusted now. This is not the science talk, and most of the science that is in it is not actually mine. So you'll have to go to the papers that will be shown on the slides if you want more detail. We're going to talk a little bit about the demographics, who applies to NEIF, and then we are going to go over the application process briefly. So, some of the NEIF facilities are focused very much on geochronology. And the first of these is the Geochronology and Tracers facility located at BGS. This is my facility. Also, I mentioned earlier that there are 3 panels, A, B, C. A deals with radiocarbon, B deals with life sciences, C deals with geochronology and environmental things. And this talk is very heavily weighted towards panel C because I'm involved in panel C and I don't know as much about the other ones. So the Geochronology and Tracers facilities, at the center of it is our uranium daughter geochronology capability. This includes, we are one of the few labs in the world that have the capability to do both very high precision analyses through isotope dilution and very high spatial resolution analyses through laser ablation. So on the isotope dilution side, the center of this is our zircon lab, uranium lab laboratory, which is mainly geared towards analyzing the mineral zircon. but we're also able to work on monazite, rutile. There has been some development work on hematite, cassiterite, and so on. And then this is paired with our laser ablation uranium lead capability, which on the one hand can be used to screen minerals for high precision analyses, high precision work being more expensive, or it can be used if you're looking to analyze a very large number of crystals, for example, if you're doing provenance studies. And a separate branch of uranium lead laser ablation would be our carbonate uranium lead capability, which mainly looks at fault filling carbonate veins, that sort of thing, to look at past fluid rock interactions. And also part of this ensemble is our uranium thorium or U-series capability, which works on the younger end of the time scale. So the maximum limit of the method is about 600,000 years. And this mainly works on carbonates, but we've done a lot of development work on gypsum lately. So we would analyze things like speleothems to derive age models for paleoclimate records, or carbonates associated with cold seeps to look at past fluid flow, or even archaeological samples if there are precipitates that are associated with artifacts that are datable by U-series. And in addition to this, GTF also includes a significant tracers capability, which can analyze samarium, neodymium, rubidium, strontium, lutetium, hafnium, lead, and silicon, whether in whole rock or different minerals. And this mainly applies to magmatic metamorphic petrology, again, provenance studies, and there's a large component of science-based archaeology as well. The other facility that does sort of a long-range dating that can encompass the whole geological time scale is the Argon Isotope Lab, which is located at CERC up in East Kilbride. So they have the capability to do both argon-argon and potassium-argon dating, and they work on potassium-bearing minerals such as K-feldspar, biotite, muscovite, hornblende, and so on. And similar to us, they work in areas around volcanism, mineralization, metamorphism, and yes, even archaeology if artifacts are bracketed by very young lava flows, for example. So it's not uncommon for people to apply to NEIF with studies that combine multiple methods, and that is very much encouraged. So uranium, lead, and argon kind of go particularly well together in that regard. And the third, mainly geochron facility, is the Cosmogenic Isotope Facility, which is again located up in CERC. They are distinguished by the enormous size of their mass spectrometer. See the person for scale. And they are able to analyze cosmogenic isotopes of helium, beryllium, carbon-14, neon, aluminum, and chlorine. Their main target mineral is quartz, but they work on some other things as well. And the way these methods work is there are basically two classes of methods. You can do exposure dating, where you use one or possibly two isotopes, and based on how much they've accumulated in your target mineral, you can determine how long that mineral has been exposed on the surface. So they would do landscape evolution studies, map the retreat of glaciers in formerly glaciated areas, that sort of thing. Or you can use two or even three of these isotopes in materials that have been shielded for a long time to figure out how long they've been shielded. So these would be things like cave sediments or sediments in cores from fluvial terraces. Now, stable isotopes is a bit of a tricky one because there are in fact three different stable isotope facilities under the NEIF umbrella. And you don't have to worry overly much if you request stable isotopes about who to contact and where they would go, because the application system we have would automatically assign you to the correct review panel depending on what sort of analyses you request. But these facilities are able to measure isotopes of hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and sulfur, although possibly not all labs would do all isotopes. And they are geared towards particular materials. So If you wanted to analyze, say, carbon and oxygen in forams from a sediment core, you'd go to the BGS Environmental Facility. If you wanted to analyze sulfur in pyrite or other stable isotopes in particular minerals, you'd go to the geology lab at SWERC. And if you wanted to do something really strange, like look at stable isotopes in wildebeest tails, you would go to the ecology lab at SERC. They have a very interesting study on wildebeest tails. I did not make that up, so feel free to look up their website for the details. Last but not least is the University of Bristol Organic Geochemistry Unit. Now, this is a mystery to me. Their website includes an extensive list of capabilities, and I've included that here. One of their proposals was accidentally submitted to our panel a while ago, and we couldn't understand a word of it, which suggests that they do some pretty nifty things with organic chemistry. But it was recently explained to me by someone who would know such things, that basically if you have a piece of old pottery, like archaeologically old, and you send it to them, they will be able to tell you what was cooked in it, which I think we all agree is pretty cool. I have absolutely no idea what happened to my radiocarbon slide. But there is a radiocarbon capability within NEIF, and it's split in two. So one radiocarbon lab is up at SWERC in East Kilbride, and they mainly do things around the carbon cycle. And any archaeological applications will go to the University of Oxford, so they have sort of a split panel. Sorry, I'm baffled. there was a radiocarbon slide there. So in terms of what NEIF actually does, a large component of what we do is training, and that takes several forms. So on the one hand, we've organized in-person training courses, and those are mainly aimed towards PhD students at the beginning of their project. It tends to run every 3 years, and we're probably overdue for one. But also there is one-on-one training. So when a project that supports a PhD student is awarded resources through NEIF, that student is encouraged or even expected to attend the facility where their samples are analyzed. Maybe not for the whole duration, because that would be quite expensive, but certainly long enough that they gain an understanding of how the methods actually work, and they are able to defend the work when it comes to their viva and publications later on. Another thing we do, so all of our science is essentially collaborative. We are not facilities that operate on a samples in, numbers out basis. So we very much like to be involved in planning the analytical work. There is considerable expertise on isotope geochemistry in these facilities. And we are very keen on helping people, especially with non-standard sort of applications. So a large part of that will be pilot studies, where someone comes up with an idea and it can be tested whether a larger project is feasible or not with a relatively small amount of resources. And some of those are approved directly by facility scientists, and some of them will have to go to the panel, depending on exactly how much work is involved. We tend to do a lot of method development in this framework, given that people come to us with non-standard applications, and that sometimes even includes talking to instrument manufacturers and getting them to adapt the kit we have in order to enable us to do very specific things. And then if all of that is successful, yes, we do deliver a pretty large bespoke, tailored analytical programs for larger NERC grants and for larger NEIF projects. A large NEIF project is in the region of £100,000 worth of analyses. So that's sort of the maximum limit that goes through these panels. And I should probably point out that when we talk about funding, NEIF offers grants in kind. So there's no actual money changing hands. The facilities have their budget. And the panels determine how we earn our keep spending that budget, depending on which proposals are awarded or supported. Another word on training, though. So during COVID, when no one could travel anywhere, our colleagues in CERC put together an application that NERC liked very much. And this was centered on developing an online training platform to do with isotope geoscience. Unfortunately, we at BGS and some of the other facilities haven't done much progress in this area. But the guys up in CERC have put together a couple of courses on argon geochronology, and on cosmogenic nuclides. So these are accessible through the Gaia platforms. The link is at the top of the page, and I encourage you to look it up. They are free to enroll. I think they are open to international. NEIF funding is only UK based, but the training platform itself is open to an international audience. And one nifty little thing that's also on the Gaia platform is 3D scans of all the NEIF facilities. So if you ever wondered what an isotope geoscience laboratory looks like, you can go to that website, and you can essentially wander through our labs in virtual reality. And they are also annotated in some detail, so all of those little colored spots are specific bits of kit, and we wrote up a paragraph about what it does and how it works and why it's there. So, a few examples of projects that have recently been funded through NEIF. This first one relates to the strontium curve, strontium isotope stratigraphy. So this is a method that is applicable to marine sediments, and the idea is that we know how the strontium isotope composition of the ocean has changed over time. And so if you have a random carbonate from somewhere and you measure its strontium composition, and maybe you also have some information from biostratigraphy and maybe some magnetostratigraphy, you can figure out what age the carbonate is to a relatively precise degree. This is work that was carried out, I should say, the funding was awarded to John MacArthur at UCL. He sent us a bunch of 4am samples from various ODP sites. My colleague Ian Miller did a fair chunk of method development to make sure that we could get the most out of those samples, and he was able to produce some remarkably precise analyses. And those are the analyses in the graph, the tiny yellow dots that fall just on the blue line. So unlike some of the other data sets here with the uncertainty intervals that are quite large, these are so precise that you can't show the uncertainty on this scale. And that then raised some interesting problems, because this is the neogene, and the age model that underpins this curve is based on astronomical tuning. So this is where people have gone and identified the expression of Milankovitch cycles in these IODP cores. And by counting those cycles and doing some modeling, they reckon they can tell the age of a particular layer to plus or minus 10,000 years. But we know that the strontium isotope curve should evolve in only one direction in the neogene, so it shouldn't go up and down. And so the precision of these strontium isotope analyses has actually allowed us to assess the accuracy of the astronomically tuned age models and even find one or two small mistakes. So it's an integration of multiple methods, and it's a study that worked out really, really well for us. The second example relates to late Ordovician mass extinction. So this was another project that was awarded to UCL. Weird that. It related to sediment records in South China. So the late Ordovician mass extinction is one of the big five. In the literature, there was some indication that it might have taken place over something like 2 million years. There was another study that suggested it went much faster, but that study was done in records that didn't have very good biostratigraphy. So the student who was involved in this was in support of a PhD project. The student spent 3 or 4 months with us in January to, well, spring last year. She analyzed 10 or so volcanic ash samples, the zircons from volcanic ash samples, by isotope dilution, thermal ionization, mass spectrometry. She got some very precise data. And the data show that indeed this extinction happened very quickly, and that the rate at which species were disappearing is essentially tied to the rate of climate change at that time. Now, I realize I just said the students spent 3 or 4 months with us. I should also clarify that NEIF awards don't include travel costs. So although we are happy to host people for a significant duration, they have to have their own funds to allow them to essentially stay, whether in Nottingham or East Kilbride or wherever else for that duration. Personally, we tend to recommend stays of maybe 2 weeks, 1 to 2 weeks, depending on what method someone is using. And the third study relates to analyzing essentially the carapace of bugs in lake sediments. So this is to do with paleoclimate records. Most of those studies are done on carbonates, but there are some places where there just isn't any carbonate. And people have developed methods to analyze invertebrate remains in order to look at past temperature and rainfall. But in the past, you needed something like 20 or 30 pieces of these little shells, and you'd aggregate them, and that would then potentially compromise the temporal resolution of what you are able to do. So prompted by a NEIF proposal, the Stable Isotope Facility next door, engaged with instrument manufacturers, and they were able to scale this methodology down to where you could analyze individual bits of carapace to a precision that still enabled the construction of paleoclimate records. So that's an example of a successful collaboration with industry instrument manufacturers that's prompted by someone from academia approaching us with a problem that they needed resolving. Who applies to NEIF? So NEIF is open to UK researchers. The eligibility criteria are the same as being a PI on a NERC research grant. So when I mentioned student proposals before, those would be submitted by the student's advisor. And it's open to both people in higher education institutes, but also other research facilities. So, for example, people from the British Geological Survey, British Antarctic Survey, NOC down in Southampton, and so on. These stats relate strictly to Panel C, so the panel I'm involved in, and they cover 5 years from 2020 to 2024. And in that time frame, we received 306 applications, of which 73% were successful. These were submitted by 201 principal investigators from 54 institutions, and the funds allocated through this process totaled £7.5 million. Out of sheer curiosity, I looked up which institutions received the most funding, and the top 20 are plotted on the right-hand side. Somewhat unsurprisingly, these were the British Geological Survey and Edinburgh, which is potentially to do with reasons of proximity to the individual laboratories. Some colleagues were a bit alarmed to see BGS come out on top, but I think we are pretty much the only institution in the country that has several hundred geologists on the payroll. So it follows that we would receive a lot of application from our own colleagues. In terms of demographics, we have a little bit over half of the proposals support a student, and those are actually a little bit more likely to be successful. This is because all proposals are graded on the same scale, but student proposals need a grade of 6 out of 10 to be funded, and non-student proposals need a grade of 7. Around 63% of the proposals were submitted by male researchers and 37% by female. The success rate between the two is very similar. I couldn't find any data on demographics among geologists geologists in academia, but I do know that about 40% of geology undergraduates are female. So and I also know from looking at data from the Astronomical Society that proportion tends to decline quite sharply as you get into the higher grades. So I would say that there's decent representation in our applicant pool of both. Yeah. Some people submit one application. Some people submit many. So out of our pool of 201 principal investigators, almost 2/3 are single applicants. And then there's another 20 or so percent who have submitted two, which brings us to another idea. So if the worst possible outcome of a NEIF proposal is that the panel will tell you exactly what they didn't like and how to fix it for the next round. So of that 30 or 20% of people who have applied twice, a lot of them did just that. They submitted an application, they received detailed feedback, they improved their application, and then they were successful. And there's a small number of people, I think about 5 or 7% of each, who have submitted either three or more applications. There's only one person who submitted 4 and was successful 4 times. There's also one person who submitted 8 and was successful once. So there's quite a wide range in terms of success rates among applicants. How does it work? So there are 2 rounds of funding each year. One deadline is usually in the autumn, one in the spring. The next one is the 8th of October. There's an application portal which can be accessed through either our website, isotopes, or isotopesuk.org, or there's a direct link just above it on the slide. So the portal itself is hosted by the University of Oxford, whereas the website is hosted or paid for by BGS, which has caused some complications in the past. The application portal also includes a fairly detailed guide for applicants that will tell you how many pages, what font, how many figures, what captions, how many references, and so on and so forth. We are a friendly bunch, which means that if you submit an application through the portal and it's not quite right, say you missed out a document or you've exceeded the page limit, depending on constraints, you will very likely be given the opportunity to fix it. So we don't really do desk rejects unless it's someone who requested a method that is entirely inappropriate for what they are planning to do. Say you want to do U-series work, 600,000 years maximum, on Precambrian rocks. Obviously, there's no way of fixing that 2 days after the deadline. A bit of advice. First of all, if you're considering submitting a proposal through NEIF, the advice would be to contact the facilities early, at least 2 weeks ahead of the deadline, I would say. Although if you get in touch 2 months ahead of the deadline, nobody will mind. If you're not sure who to get in touch with, there are contact details on the Isotopes UK website. They will give you the names of the panel secretaries. They will be able to direct you to an appropriate member of staff. You should contact the facilities because, as I said earlier, there's a lot of expertise there and they can help you refine your application. And we also know what the panel like to see. How much you should focus on each component, on the background, on the isotope work, what sort of figures you should include, and so on and so forth. But there's another reason as well, and that's in the application form, there's a box you have to tick. And that box demonstrates that you have contacted the facility. So if a facility scientists then stand up and say, we've never heard of this person, that looks a bit silly. The second sort of bit of advice would be to know your audience. A lot of you will be familiar with applications to NERC larger grants, and larger grants are all about the big idea. How do you grab their attention? What's the amazing thing you're going to do if you receive this pot of money? The NEIF panel focuses much more on the specifics of the isotope work. So in collaboration with the facility scientist who will be responsible for your project, you kind of have to demonstrate that you understand what you're going to do with that data and what the limitations will be. However pretty the big picture image is, the panels are not going to be very receptive to that unless there is considerable detail on how the isotope data are going to be used, because they just want to make sure that what limited funding is available is allocated to something that is likely to produce a decent outcome. Most of the proposals are hypothesis-driven. Proposals that include a component of method development are also very popular. So probably the most common bit of feedback that we have to write in our outcome letters is that the hypotheses weren't clear enough, and so basically no one understood how the data were going to be used. Remember that reviewers are people too. So these are scientists who are expert in their fields, and they sign up for a term of 3 years, and they evaluate proposals, and they take that very, very seriously. But at the same time, they receive 5 to 10 proposals to evaluate about 2 weeks before the meeting takes place. So you can only gain from making it easy for them to figure out what the proposal is about. Really good figures, supporting materials come into that. And just clear and concise writing. The proposals aren't very long. For most applications, there's a page limit of 2 sides of A4. So there isn't a lot of room for ambiguity. And finally, if you're looking at submitting an application that's in support of a student project, that will have to include a student statement. And that student statement needs to read like it was written by a student. Obviously, the student should write it. People I work with, I always advise them to go first person and make it very clear why the application is important to the PhD. The application shouldn't be crucial to the PhD, because that makes the panel a bit suspicious. It's not entirely fair to take on a student and then have their PhD hinge entirely on success in securing funding that hasn't yet been applied to. So there's some nuance there, but again, the facility scientists can help you in finding exactly the right tone. And as far as the timing of student applications is concerned, generally the panel like to see proposals where all the samples are already in hand to make sure that there aren't going to be any difficulties around accessing field areas or importing samples from another country or getting permits to sample in, say, a national park or places like that. So you probably wouldn't be applying in the first year of the project, assuming you do most of your field work in the first summer. Then they also tend to get suspicious if you apply in your third year, purely because that doesn't give the labs a lot of time to complete the work in order for the student to be able to finish on time and submit their thesis. And you have to remember that these labs rely on fairly complicated instrumentation, and so there's frequently downtime. Things break down. They might take a month or 2 or 3 or 5 to resolve. So the ideal time for a student proposal is in the second year. But having said that, as I said earlier, applying early is sometimes to your benefit, because you get the feedback that will ultimately allow you to be successful. NEIF only supports PhD students. However, if you have a project that the master's student is working on and you'd like to submit it, you can do that. It will not count as a student project, though. And that's purely because the shorter duration of a master's program would place a lot of strain on the facility, and it's quite risky for the student as well to expect data in a relatively short time frame. Although, if you engage with the facility early, we can sometimes put things through fairly quickly. But a project that is around the master's thesis would count as a direct access proposal, so it would need to secure a score of 7 out of 10. A bit on the time scale. So the deadline is, the next one is in October. People have complained, every once in a while we seek feedback from the community. People have complained that it takes a very long time to get the feedback. So all three panels, A, B, and C, share a common deadline, which is simpler for admin purposes. But the meetings take place at different times through the year. So for example, panel C will be meeting in early December. So there's a 2-month gap between the application deadline and the panel meeting. And that allows us to check all the applications, make sure everyone's eligible, make sure all the documentation is in place, make sure there's enough time for reviewers to actually go through the panel, identify any conflicts of interest, and so on and so forth. To mitigate the unhappiness a little bit, a couple of years ago, we implemented this thing where we send out an early notification on or the day after the meeting, which will be simply a pass or fail. So it will tell you if you got a fundable grade or an unfundable grade. And then detailed feedback, including the comments from the reviewers, will be sent out possibly a month later. It's a bit complicated with the autumn round because we usually meet before Christmas and then everyone goes on holiday. So that in itself introduces a delay of a few weeks in sending out the detailed feedback. But even if it is, 3 or 4 months after the application deadline, you should still have 2 or 3 months to refine your proposal if you would like to apply again in the event that you were unsuccessful. Right, last bits. I think we've already covered this, that we are grading on a scale of 0 to 10. 7 is the minimum grade for funding if you don't have a student on your proposal. Student proposals get funded with a grade of 6. There's a special grade R star. This is an invited resubmission. So these are proposals that the panel really liked, but they felt there was some information missing. So these are usually fairly easy to turn around. And that's about it. And if you'd like to point out that the man in the picture should be wearing gloves, you're probably right. Questions?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anna. That was actually really very, very useful. I had a proposal in as a PhD student and was unsuccessful the first time around, but got really good feedback and lots of work with Adrian Boyce, who was at CERC at the time, and was successful in the next round. And it has been fundamentally useful to my PhD. So
very glad to hear that. We go through the feedback very carefully to ensure it's constructive. And the current crop of reviewers, and frankly, this goes back years, are very, very good at writing feedback, bearing in mind that this will be read probably by someone at the very early stages of their careers. So they tend to be very supportive.
Yes. And it was more that this could be made better in these ways. And if you do that, it'll probably be fine. So it was a very positive experience. I think, yes, we have a question there from Elliot Carter, but wondering about how long and how detailed the application form is.
So the application form is not very long itself. It includes a summary of the proposal, a student statement if applicable, and then just details of what analyses are requested. But in addition to that, you have to I've forgotten how to English. You have to submit a case for support. And the length of that varies between 2 and 4 sides of A4 text. And that depends on which facility you are applying to. So most of the panel C applications will be 2 sides of text. If you're applying for cosmogenics, I think it's 3 sides. And if you are applying for multiple things that go beyond the single panel, so for example, you might be going for strontium work on bones and some carbon-14 dating. So you have to explain your science to 2 entirely different groups of people. Then I think it's 4 pages. And then there's room for an appendix of up to 4 pages of figures and tables.
Oh, okay. I
This
think
is
that's
again,
longer than it used to be. I
yes,
seem to remember it
that's,
being very
well,
tight.
it used to be just 1 page of figures.
Yep.
But when NEIF came into existence, we realized that some panels were doing things better than other panels. That 1 page of figures was usually very condensed, and sometimes that made the figures difficult to read.
Mm.
And then there are facilities, for example, the Cosmogenic Isotope Facility expects to see a photo of every single sample. So I think they had the longest applications. And we thought, well, maybe we don't need that for every proposal, for every project, but actually having a nice readable map and some outcrop photos and maybe some microscope images would be beneficial to everybody.
Yeah, definitely. That would be easier than trying to, I think I'm maybe one, maybe two figures in mine. It was very hard to get that balance right. That's really positive.
It's surprising how small fonts can get.
It is. And so we've got another question from Revan. Wondering if it's possible to apply for analysis for a passion project. So although they are a PhD student, but wondering if it was possible to apply independently for another project.
Not unless you get your supervisor to front it.
Yeah. Okay.
So
That's
students, unfortunately, are not eligible to apply in their own name.
Yeah. So you would have to be at a university or a researcher at a university.
Oh, I misunderstood. Right. So you would need to have support from an institution.
Yeah.
For example, HRAs, honorary research associates who are retired, are able to apply as long as they provide a letter from their head of department saying that they will be supported for the duration of the project.
Oh, interesting. Okay. There may be some options. Might need to discuss it just a bit more. Got another question. Is there any draft or reference of successful application proposals where one could kind of see what a successful application looks like, Diana?
We've been asked this a lot, and unfortunately the answer is no, partly because IPR.
Yeah.
And a lot of people use this scheme as a scoping thing for larger grants, so we wouldn't want them to be scooped. Yeah. But whichever facility scientist you interact with should be able to direct you in the right direction. So, for example, this round I am expecting to be involved in 2 proposals. I've already had discussions with both PIs, and they will likely be sending a first draft to me early next month. And then there will be a back and forth where we will refine it, and it doesn't need to be perfect the first time, is what I'm trying to say.
So just a follow-up question from Revan, wondering if it's possible to apply if there's a PI from a university that was also interested. So that would be the way to do it, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. So perfect. Great. So we've one more question, and thank you, Diana. Inquire if there are appropriate facilities for dating ultramafic mafic rocks at any of the NEIF facilities. And could I also inquire about are there suitable analytical techniques for in situ dating of sulfides? So 2 questions.
So mafic, ultramafic, it depends on what mineral you're interested in. Yeah. To me, it sounds a bit like argon. Hornblende, things like that, maybe, possibly. This is my downfall. I'm not a hard rock geologist. I do stratigraphy.
There should still be zircon in ultramafic.
We've done black rocks, and then the sulfides again. It depends on exactly what kind. Yeah. So I would recommend that you put some details in an email, and possibly ping it to me. I am disturbingly easy to find online.
Perfect. I can put your contact details in the chat as well. That's great. Yeah. I think there are other people in the facility who you'd be able to point people towards, right? Yeah. Perfect. Great. I guess the only thing is, how long does the grant last? Will be my question.
It depends. So we are funded on a 6-month cycle, but that doesn't mean that grants last 6 months. If there's a student involved, then certainly for the duration of their PhD, the grant is active. And even if the analytical work has been completed, we are still on hand to offer support with data interpretation and writing methods chapters and so on and so forth. I think the maximum, there was some discussion about this, because every once in a while, and this doesn't happen very often, people are successful and then we don't hear from them again. So I think the maximum we would keep a proposal open is about 4 years, and after that point you'd have to reapply if you then realized, oh, I still want to analyze these samples.
That seems fair. Perfect. Okay.
But having said that, we can usually do turnaround of a couple of months on some things, so it varies a lot.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. There are no more questions, but lots of thank yous in the chat, Diana. Really very much appreciated. This has been recorded and will be put on the MinSAP website, and you'll all get an email to let you know when that is available if you want to revisit anything. And just a final thank you to Diana. Really appreciate it, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you.